Theodore Blackstone's Porsche swept into the circular drive at 3 p.m. instead of his usual 8, a cancelled board meeting giving him an afternoon he didn't know how to fill. Through the French doors of his daughter's study, he glimpsed two figures, 15-year-old Sophia in her wheelchair, and across from her, a man in gardener's coveralls whose hands moved across spreadsheets with surgical precision. Vincent Hayes, the landscaper who'd started 2 months ago. Theodore's chest tightened as he watched this stranger lean forward, explaining something that made Sophia's face illuminate, not with the practiced smile she wore for physical therapists, but with genuine fascination. Papers covered the mahogany table between them, and Theodore could make out charts, graphs, numbers that seemed far too complex for casual conversation. When had his brilliant daughter ever looked that engaged with anyone? What could a man who trimmed hedges possibly teach the girl who'd once dreamed of running Meridian Capital? Vincent Hayes had learned to make himself invisible long before prison taught him the art of survival. Now, at 42, he moved through the manicured gardens of Oakwood Heights like a ghost, present but unseen, useful but forgotten. The wealthy residents barely glanced at the man who transformed their landscapes into magazine-worthy perfection, never suspecting that those dirt-stained hands had once managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions. 5 years. That's how long it had been since the Harrison investment scandal broke, since Vincent's world imploded in a cascade of federal charges and front-page headlines. 2 years in minimum security, 3 years of rebuilding from nothing. His ex-wife Rachel had taken their son Tommy to California before the ink dried on his release papers, leaving Vincent with a forwarding address and a lawyer's letter explaining why he'd never see his boy again. The cottage behind the Blackstone estate felt cavernous for one person, its silence broken only by the hum of an ancient refrigerator and the tick of a clock that seemed to count the moments until his next scheduled phone call with Tommy, if Tommy was willing to take it. Most evenings, Vincent would sit at his small kitchen table with a legal pad, writing letters he'd never send. Dear Tommy, I saw a boy today who reminded me of you. He was building something with blocks, the same way you used to line up your toy cars in perfect rows. Do you still do that? Do you still count everything twice before you're satisfied it's right? The letters accumulated in a shoebox beneath his bed, a cemetery of words meant for the son who'd stopped calling him Dad and started using his first name during their increasingly stilted monthly conversations. Vincent had tried everything, asking about school, sports, friends, but Tommy's responses grew shorter with each call, until their last conversation had been little more than awkward silence, punctuated by Rachel's voice in the background, prompting her son to be polite. Sometimes, walking through the wealthy neighborhoods where families laughed behind picture windows, Vincent would catch sight of fathers teaching sons to ride bicycles or throwing baseballs, and the ache in his chest would intensify until he had to look away. A construction worker's lunchbox abandoned on a park bench, a child's sneaker left behind on playground equipment. These fragments of normal family life had become landmines that could detonate his composure without warning. Can't trust a man who built his life on lies, Rachel had written. Those words carved themselves deeper than any judge's sentence, echoing in Vincent's mind every night when he stared at the ceiling of his too-quiet bedroom, wondering if Tommy ever thought about him, or if his son had learned to see him the way the rest of the world did, as a cautionary tale about what happened when ambition consumed integrity. The cottage behind the Blackstone estate was smaller than his old office, but it was honest work now. No clients to deceive, no numbers to manipulate, no sleepless nights wondering when the house of cards would collapse. Just soil and seasons, the simple mathematics of growth and decay. Yet even in this new simplicity, the ghost of fatherhood haunted him. Every time he saw a father and child together, every time he passed the elementary school during dismissal, the same thought would surface. Tommy should be 15 now. Does he look like me? Does he hate that he looks like me? Vincent was pruning the rose bushes beneath Sophia's study window when he first heard her voice, not speaking, but humming. A complex melody that seemed to carry mathematical precision, the same way Tommy used to hum while arranging his baseball cards by statistics. He glanced up and saw her through the glass, wheelchair positioned at a desk covered with textbooks, advanced calculus at 15, economics journals stacked beside graphic novels, a girl whose mind clearly outpaced her body's limitations. 3 years ago, he'd learned from the housekeeper's whispers, the accident that killed her mother and left Sophia unable to walk. Theodore Blackstone, the financial titan, suddenly thrust into single parenthood while running Meridian Capital. A daughter who'd once dreamed of following in his footsteps, now confined to a world that seemed to expect less of her with each passing month. Vincent understood that particular kind of prison. He also understood what it meant to be written off by the people who should believe in you most. The morning everything changed started like any other. Vincent was replacing the irrigation system near the study when he heard Sophia's frustrated sigh carry through the open window. She was staring at a textbook, fingers drumming against her wheelchair's armrest in patterns that looked almost like equations. The same restless intelligence Vincent recognized from watching Tommy work through math problems at the kitchen table years ago. "Compound interest making your head spin?" Vincent called out before he could stop himself. Sophia startled, spinning her chair toward the window. "You know about compound interest?" Vincent felt the familiar clench in his stomach, the moment when his past and present collided. But looking at Sophia's face, he saw something that made his breath catch, the same hungry curiosity that used to light up Tommy's eyes when they'd work on homework together. This girl wasn't just brilliant. She was isolated, overlooked, desperate for someone to see her potential, the way Vincent had once seen Tommy's. The paternal instinct that had lain dormant for 5 years stirred to life. Here was a child who needed teaching, patience, encouragement, all the things he'd been denied the chance to give his own son. "I used to know a thing or two about numbers," he said carefully, his voice taking on the gentle tone he'd once reserved for bedtime stories and scraped knees. "Used to?" Sophia's eyes, sharp and skeptical, reminded him painfully of Tommy at age 10, questioning everything with scientific precision. "What happened?" Vincent set down his tools and approached the window, feeling something shift inside his chest. For the first time in years, someone was asking him to teach instead of confess. "I made choices that taught me the difference between being smart and being wise." He gestured toward her textbook, falling naturally into the patient rhythm he'd once used with his son. "What's got you puzzled?" For the next hour, Vincent found himself explaining investment theory through the study window, watching Sophia's face light up as complex concepts clicked into place. She didn't ask about his credentials or wonder why a landscaper understood portfolio diversification. She simply absorbed everything he offered, asked questions that revealed an intuitive grasp of financial markets that impressed him more than most MBA students he'd once mentored. But more than her intelligence, it was the way she listened, leaning forward with complete attention, the same way Tommy used to listen when Vincent explained why certain baseball statistics mattered more than others. That unlocked something Vincent had thought was lost forever. The joy of being a teacher, the pride of watching understanding dawn in a young mind, the profound satisfaction of being useful to someone who needed exactly what he had to offer. "You should talk to my father," Sophia said as Vincent prepared to return to his work. "He thinks I'm too fragile for the business world now." "And what do you think?" Sophia's jaw set with determination that reminded Vincent of his younger self, before ambition curdled into desperation. "I think broken things can be stronger in the right places." As Vincent returned to his landscaping work, he carried with him something he hadn't felt in years, the warm exhaustion that came from nurturing a child's mind. For one precious hour, he hadn't been Vincent Hayes, the convicted felon. He'd been Vincent Hayes the father, patient, knowledgeable, protective. It was a role he'd thought he'd lost forever, and discovering he could still inhabit it, even with someone else's child, felt like finding a piece of his soul he'd assumed was dead. Over the following weeks, their informal lessons became routine. Vincent would finish his morning tasks, then spend his lunch break answering Sophia's questions about market analysis, corporate governance, ethical investing. She devoured every concept he offered, connecting dots between theory and real-world applications with an intuition that took most professionals years to develop. But for Vincent, each session was about more than education. It was the reclamation of fatherhood, the chance to pour his paternal instincts into someone who welcomed them. When Sophia struggled with a concept, Vincent felt the familiar flutter of protective concern. When she mastered something difficult, pride swelled in his chest with an intensity that surprised him. He began to look forward to their conversations, the way he'd once anticipated Tommy's bedtime stories, planning lessons with the same care he'd once put into birthday surprises. But it was Sophia who taught Vincent something he'd forgotten, that knowledge meant nothing without integrity to guide it. "Why did you stop working in finance?" she asked one afternoon, after they'd spent an hour discussing the ethics of high-frequency trading. Vincent had been dreading this question since their first conversation. In his mind, he could see Tommy's face the day the FBI agents came to their house, confusion giving way to shame as neighbors whispered and pointed. He could hear his son's voice, small and hurt. "Dad, why is everyone saying you're bad?" "I did something unforgivable. I falsified investment reports to hide massive losses, convinced myself I was buying time to recover the money. Instead, I destroyed lives." He waited for her to recoil, to call for security, to treat him like the criminal he was. He waited for the same look of disappointment that had been the last expression he'd seen in Tommy's eyes. Instead, Sophia nodded slowly. "How many people got hurt? How many people got? 200 families lost their retirement savings. Some lost their homes. A few—" Vincent's voice cracked, remembering the newspaper articles about the suicides, the families torn apart by his lies. "A few took their own lives." Sophia absorbed this in silence, then asked the question that shattered him. "Do you think about them every day?" "Every single day." The weight of that truth, that he carried 200 broken families in his conscience alongside the memory of his own son's lost faith, threatened to crush him. "Good," she said simply. "That means you learned something." In that moment, Vincent saw something in Sophia that he desperately hoped Tommy might possess someday. The ability to separate past mistakes from present character, to believe in redemption without ignoring the cost of failure. She was giving him what his own son couldn't, the chance to be worthy of trust again. Their bond deepened through shared understanding of loss and limitation. Sophia spoke of dreams deferred, of a father who loved her but couldn't see past her wheelchair to her capabilities. Vincent shared the weight of mistakes that couldn't be undone, of a son he'd never hold again, of respect once lost that might never be recovered. But in Sophia's presence he felt useful again, needed again, not despite his failures, but because of what those failures had taught him. "It's not enough to just make money," Sophia explained one afternoon, sketching out an investment thesis that married profit with purpose. "We have the opportunity to fund solutions to problems we understand personally." Vincent realized he was witnessing the birth of something revolutionary, not just a business model, but a philosophy that could redefine success in his former industry. And perhaps, if he was very careful and very lucky, a path toward the kind of redemption that might someday allow him to look his son in the eye again. Neither of them knew that Theodore Blackstone was about to discover their secret collaboration. The confrontation exploded with the force of years of suppressed emotion. Theodore burst through the study doors like a man possessed, his usually composed demeanor shattered by the sight of his daughter laughing with a convicted felon. "Step away from her!" Theodore's voice echoed through the room, causing both Vincent and Sophia to freeze. "I know exactly who you are, Vincent Hayes. Did you think I wouldn't run background checks on everyone who works on my property?" Vincent stood slowly, hands raised in surrender, but inside his chest, a familiar terror bloomed. Not for himself, but for the trust he was about to lose. He could see Tommy's face again. That moment when his son first understood that his father was someone to be ashamed of. Now he would watch that same realization dawn in Sophia's eyes, and the paternal joy he'd rediscovered would die a second death. "Mr. Blackstone, I can explain." "Explain what? How a man who defrauded investors out of $50 million somehow gained access to my vulnerable daughter?" Theodore's face flushed red with rage. "How you've been filling her head with your twisted version of financial wisdom." "Dad, stop!" Sophia spun her wheelchair between the two men. "Vincent has been helping me understand." "Helping you?" Theodore laughed bitterly. "Sophia, this man is a predator. He identifies people he can manipulate, vulnerable people who trust easily, and he exploits them. That's how he built his entire career before it collapsed." Each word hit Vincent like a physical blow, not because they were unfair, but because they contained enough truth to devastate. He had manipulated people, had exploited trust, had built his success on a foundation of calculated deception. But worse than Theodore's accusations was the fear that Sophia would look at him now the way Tommy had looked at him in that courtroom, with the crushing disappointment of a child learning that their hero was actually a villain. Vincent's voice, when he finally found it, carried the weight of a father's worst nightmare realized twice over. "You're right," he said quietly, surprising both Blackstones. "I did all of those things. I convinced myself that everyone was playing the same game, that bending rules was just business as usual. I told myself I was protecting my clients when I was really protecting my own reputation." Theodore paused, clearly not expecting this admission. "But your daughter isn't just someone I'm trying to manipulate," Vincent continued, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "She's the smartest person I've met since getting out of prison. Her ideas about impact investing could revolutionize how we think about corporate responsibility. She understands things about ethical business practices that I had to learn through catastrophic failure." As he spoke, Vincent realized he wasn't just defending his relationship with Sophia, he was defending the father he'd tried to become in her presence, the version of himself that Tommy had never seen. With Sophia, he'd been patient, honest, protective without being possessive. He'd been the father he should have been all along. "Don't you dare try to turn this around!" Theodore snapped. "You're a convicted criminal who has been secretly meeting with my daughter. I should have you arrested for what?" Sophia's voice cut through her father's tirade. "For treating me like I have a functioning brain, for believing I might have something valuable to contribute to the world, for being the first person in 3 years to talk to me about finance without looking at me like I'm made of glass." Theodore's anger wavered as he saw tears in his daughter's eyes. Vincent made mistakes, terrible mistakes that hurt people. Sophia continued. "But he paid for them. He served his time, he lost everything, and now he's trying to do better. Meanwhile, you won't even let me audit classes at the community college because you're afraid I'll get hurt. That's not... I just want to protect you." "From what? From failing? From taking risks? From having the chance to succeed?" Sophia's voice broke. "Mom died in that accident, Dad. Not me. But you've been treating me like I died too." The room fell silent except for the sound of Sophia's quiet sobs. Vincent looked at this brilliant girl, this child who had become, in some inexplicable way, a path back to fatherhood, and felt his heart breaking for the second time in his life. The first had been for Tommy, who couldn't forgive him. Now it was for Sophia, who would be forbidden from giving him the chance to be worthy of forgiveness. Vincent gathered his things, each movement careful and deliberate, the way he'd learned to move in prison when showing aggression could mean disaster. "I'll go pack my belongings, Mr. Blackstone. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Vincent, no!" Sophia reached for his arm. "Dad, you can't do this. You can't keep pushing away everyone who believes in me." But Theodore's protective instincts overrode everything else. "Get off my property. If I see you near my daughter again, I'll have you arrested for violating the terms of your parole." As Vincent walked toward the door, he heard Sophia calling after him, her voice carrying a pain that reminded him why he'd sworn never to cause harm again. It was Tommy's voice all over again, another child watching him walk away, another relationship destroyed by the weight of his failures. Behind him, Theodore tried to comfort his daughter, but she pulled away from his touch. "You just destroyed the only friendship I've had since the accident," she whispered. "Are you happy now?" Vincent closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway, listening to Sophia cry. The sound cut through him like nothing had since the day he'd said goodbye to Tommy at the federal courthouse. He'd found a way to be a father again, had discovered that his capacity for nurturing hadn't died with his marriage, and now it was being ripped away just as brutally as before. Walking back to his cottage, Vincent realized the cruelest irony of all. In trying to make amends for the father he'd failed to be, he'd become the man who'd failed another child. The pattern felt inescapable, the lesson clear. Some people were meant to nurture from a distance, if at all. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper, writing another letter he'd never send. "Dear Tommy, I met a girl today who reminded me what it felt like to be your dad. She was brilliant and brave and saw something good in me that I thought was gone forever. But I lost her too, the way I lost you. Maybe some people aren't meant to be fathers. Maybe that's the real lesson I was supposed to learn." He folded the letter carefully and added it to the shoebox under his bed, another apology addressed to the silence. The next 2 weeks proved Theodore right about one thing. Vincent Hayes was dangerous. Not because he was a criminal, but because his absence demonstrated just how much light he'd brought into Sophia's world. She stopped eating regularly, picking at meals while staring out the window toward the garden where Vincent no longer worked. Her tutors reported that she'd become distracted, unengaged, answering questions with mechanical precision but no passion. The spark that had begun to return to her eyes during those afternoon lessons flickered and died. Dr. Martinez, Sophia's therapist, requested an emergency meeting with Theodore. "I'm concerned about Sophia's emotional state," the doctor said. "She's regressed significantly in the past 2 weeks. She keeps mentioning someone named Vincent, who was helping her with her studies. She seems to feel that losing this mentor represents another abandonment, similar to her mother's death." Theodore felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This Vincent person, he was unsuitable, a bad influence. Perhaps, but Sophia clearly formed a meaningful connection with him. She spoke about future plans, about goals she wanted to achieve. Now she's talking about being trapped and useless. Those are dangerous words for a teenager with her history of trauma. That night, Theodore found himself in his home office, staring at Vincent's employment file. Beneath the criminal record, he discovered details that complicated his black and white view of the man. Recommendations from the prison chaplain describing Vincent's work with financially illiterate inmates, volunteer hours at a legal aid society, helping fraud victims navigate bankruptcy. Articles Vincent had written about white-collar crime prevention, published in academic journals under his own name, despite the professional stigma. The picture that emerged was of a man genuinely trying to atone for his sins, not escape them. Theodore's phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "I've been thinking about what Vincent taught me. I want to write a paper about ethical investing for the academic decathlon. But I can't do it without his help. I know you hate him, but I'm asking you to give him a chance. Please, Dad. I need this. Theodore stared at the message for a long time, remembering the daughter who used to climb into his lap during Meridian Capital's board meetings, asking endless questions about market trends and company valuations. When had he stopped seeing her potential and started seeing only her limitations? The next morning, Theodore drove to Vincent's new apartment across town. The building was run down, the hallway smelling of industrial disinfectant and disappointment. Vincent answered the door in work clothes, clearly preparing for another day of manual labor, but Theodore could see the man had lost weight, the haunted look of someone living with fresh grief. "Mr. Blackstone," Vincent's voice was carefully neutral, "if you're here to threaten me again, I'm here to understand." Theodore interrupted. "Help me understand what you see in my daughter that I'm missing." Vincent studied Theodore's face, searching for traps. The apartment behind him was visible, a space that seemed too large for one person, furnished with the bare minimum. A single chair at a table set for one. A bed that clearly hadn't been slept in recently. On the kitchen counter, a stack of sealed envelopes addressed in Vincent's handwriting to someone named Tommy. Finally, Vincent stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was sparse but clean, dominated by a desk covered with financial journals and a laptop displaying market analysis spreadsheets. On the wall hung a framed photo of a young boy with Vincent's eyes. His son, Theodore realized. Below it, a shoebox sat open on a side table, filled with what looked like dozens of handwritten letters. Theodore couldn't help but notice the profound loneliness of the space, the silence that seemed to press against the walls, the careful organization of a man with too much time to think. This wasn't the lair of a predator, but the cell of a man serving a self-imposed sentence. "Sophia is brilliant," Vincent said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of recent loss. "Not just smart, brilliant. Her instincts for market analysis rival analysts with decades of experience. But more than that, she has something I never had. Genuine concern for the human cost of financial decisions." Theodore picked up a notebook filled with Sophia's handwriting, complex equations interwoven with questions about corporate responsibility and social impact. "She's been teaching me as much as I've been teaching her," Vincent continued. "Her ideas about impact investing could transform how we approach wealth management. She wants to prove that making money and doing good aren't mutually exclusive." He paused, looking at his son's photograph. "She reminds me of Tommy, my boy. Same curiosity, same refusal to accept simple answers to complex questions. And you believe she can do this, despite her disability?" Vincent's expression hardened, but with pain rather than anger. "Her disability is irrelevant to her intellectual capacity. The only thing limiting Sophia is your fear of letting her try." He gestured toward the letters on his table. "I write to my son every week. Have for 5 years. He stopped responding 3 years ago, but I keep writing because being a father doesn't stop just because you've failed at it." Theodore felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't a man trying to manipulate his daughter. This was a father trying to reclaim some piece of his identity through the only means available to him. "She's stronger than both of us," Vincent said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "She faces her limitations every day and still dreams of changing the world. When's the last time either of us could say the same?" They sat in uncomfortable silence, two fathers grappling with their failures. Theodore's eyes kept drifting to those sealed envelopes, evidence of a love so persistent it continued despite all hope of reciprocation. Finally, Theodore spoke. "Meridian Capital needs a consultant on ethical investing practices. The board has been pressuring me to develop policies around ESG criteria, environmental, social, and governance factors. It's not a full-time position, and it would require complete transparency about your background, but Vincent's eyes widened, and for a moment, Theodore saw not the convicted felon, but the father who'd been writing letters to a silent son for years. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to help my daughter achieve her goals while proving that redemption is possible." Theodore paused. "Assuming you can handle having your past scrutinized by our clients." "I've been scrutinizing it myself for 5 years." Vincent replied, his hand unconsciously moving toward the shoebox of letters. "I'm ready for other people to do the same." "There's one condition. Sophia wants to audit some of our meetings, learn about practical applications of investment theory. I want you to mentor her. Officially, transparently, with proper oversight." Vincent felt tears threatening. The chance to teach again, to guide a brilliant mind, to be useful to someone who needed exactly what he had to offer. It was more than he'd dared hope for. "Why would you trust me with something so precious?" Theodore stood to leave, his gaze lingering on the photograph of Vincent's son. "Because Sophia trusts you, and because she's a better judge of character than her overprotective father." He paused at the door. "Also because I think you understand the weight of second chances better than most people." After Theodore left, Vincent sat alone in his apartment, holding one of the unsent letters to Tommy. For the first time in months, he felt something other than despair about his relationship with his son. If he could prove worthy of Sophia's trust, if he could help build something meaningful and good, maybe someday Tommy would be willing to listen when his father finally found the courage to call. The reunion took place in Meridian Capital's smallest conference room, with Theodore present as both observer and participant. Sophia wheeled herself to the table with a confidence Theodore hadn't seen since before the accident, her arms filled with research she'd compiled during Vincent's absence. Vincent entered the room carefully, his expression a mixture of professional composure and barely contained emotion. When Sophia smiled at him, the first genuine smile Theodore had seen from her in weeks, Vincent's face transformed. The haunted look faded, replaced by something Theodore recognized as paternal pride. "I've been working on the ethical investing framework," Sophia announced, spreading papers across the polished surface. "I think we need to consider not just profit potential, but long-term social sustainability." Vincent smiled as he reviewed her work, sophisticated analysis that incorporated environmental impact, worker welfare, and community development into traditional financial metrics. His attention to her ideas was complete, the kind of focused listening Theodore remembered giving his daughter before fear made him protective instead of supportive. "This is graduate-level thinking," Vincent told Theodore, but his tone carried the unmistakable warmth of a parent bragging about their child's accomplishments. "Most institutional investors haven't progressed this far in their ESG integration." "So we can actually do this?" Sophia asked, her excitement infectious. "We can create investment products that make money while making a difference. Not only can we do it," Theodore said, surprising himself with his enthusiasm, "we're going to revolutionize how Meridian Capital approaches portfolio management. Vincent, I want you to develop this into a full business plan. Sophia, I want you to research case studies of successful impact investments." Over the following months, their unlikely partnership flourished. Vincent's experience provided the technical foundation, Theodore's resources offered the platform, and Sophia's vision supplied the moral compass. Together, they developed investment strategies that generated competitive returns while funding solutions to problems they understood personally: medical research, accessibility technology, educational equity. Vincent threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised Theodore. He wasn't just building investment models. He was constructing a legacy worthy of the trust Sophia had placed in him. During late-night planning sessions, Theodore would catch Vincent looking at his phone, checking for messages that never came. The parallel heartbreak of their situations, Theodore's fear of losing Sophia, Vincent's grief over losing Tommy, created an unexpected understanding between them. Sophia's insights often surprised both men. During one meeting about healthcare investments, she observed, "We're not just looking for companies that treat diseases. We should invest in companies that prevent them, that improve quality of life, that recognize that health isn't just about cure, it's about dignity." Vincent nodded, remembering his own experience with depression after his release from prison. The way losing Tommy had felt like a terminal diagnosis. Sophia's right. We have to think beyond traditional metrics to consider human impact. Theodore watched his daughter command the room with the same natural authority he'd once possessed, but tempered with wisdom he'd never had at her age. More importantly, he watched Vincent nurture that authority with the careful attention of someone who understood how precious and fragile young talent could be. After particularly successful presentations, Theodore would see Vincent's hand move unconsciously toward his phone, as if to share good news with someone who wouldn't answer. The gesture was so automatic, so ingrained, that Theodore realized Vincent had been celebrating Sophia's victories as a parent would. Proud, protective, invested in her success as if it were his own child's. The academic decathlon paper Sophia submitted that spring, Ethical Investing as a Tool for Social Justice, won the state championship and earned her early admission to Harvard's economics program. But more importantly, it established the philosophical foundation for what would become Meridian Capital's most successful division. Vincent's reaction to Sophia's acceptance letter was telling. He stood very still for a long moment, then excused himself to step outside. When he returned, his eyes were red, and Theodore understood that Vincent was grieving and celebrating simultaneously. Proud of Sophia's achievement, while acutely aware that Tommy had never experienced his father's pride in quite the same way. By Sophia's 18th birthday, their impact investing fund had grown to over $200 million in assets under management. They'd helped launch dozens of socially conscious startups, funded research that led to 3 breakthrough medical devices, and demonstrated that principled investing could outperform traditional approaches. The success brought media attention that Vincent initially dreaded, but when reporters asked about his criminal past, Sophia insisted on answering alongside him. "Vincent made mistakes that hurt people," she told a Wall Street Journal reporter, "but his willingness to face those mistakes honestly, to learn from them and do better, is exactly the kind of thinking we need in the financial industry. We can't eliminate risk, but we can take responsibility for the consequences of our choices." Vincent watched this interview from the wings, his chest tight with an emotion he'd almost forgotten. Fatherly pride untainted by guilt or regret. Sophia spoke about him with the fierce loyalty of a daughter defending her father. And Vincent realized that, while he'd lost the chance to guide Tommy through his formative years, he'd been given the extraordinary gift of watching Sophia become the kind of person who made the world better. Vincent watched from the audience as Sophia delivered the keynote address at Harvard's Undergraduate Investment Club, her wheelchair positioned confidently behind the podium as she outlined her vision for the future of ethical finance. "My mentor once told me that broken things can be stronger in the right places," she said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "The same is true for people. Our failures don't disqualify us from success. They teach us how to succeed responsibly." After the presentation, students crowded around Sophia with questions and business cards. Vincent felt a familiar pride, different from the hollow satisfaction of his old success. This was pride earned through service, through helping someone else achieve their dreams while finding redemption for his own failures. It was the pride of a parent watching their child exceed every expectation, even if that child wasn't biologically his own. More importantly, Vincent realized he'd finally found something worth writing to Tommy about that wasn't an apology. Theodore approached as the crowd dispersed. "She's been accepted to every graduate program she applied to, full scholarships to MIT, Stanford, Wharton, but she wants to defer for a year." "To do what?" "To launch her own firm. With you as CFO, assuming you're interested in working for someone half your age who's already twice as wise." Vincent looked at Sophia, who was still surrounded by admirers, and saw the future of everything he'd once hoped to represent in the financial world. Integrity made manifest, success built on a foundation of genuine service. But more than that, he saw a young woman who'd given him the chance to be a father figure without shame, to pour his paternal instincts into someone who welcomed them. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do," he said, already composing the email he'd write to Tommy that night. Not another apology, but an invitation to meet the remarkable young woman who'd helped his father remember who he used to be. 2 years later, at Sophia's college graduation, the three of them sat in a quiet restaurant, celebrating not just her degree, but the success of Blackstone Hayes Impact Ventures, the company that had become a model for responsible investing nationwide. "I have an announcement," Sophia said, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "Goldman Sachs offered me a position in their investment banking division. Starting salary is more than most people make in 5 years. Theodore and Vincent exchanged glances, knowing what came next. "I turned them down," Sophia continued with a grin. "I'd rather build something meaningful than just manage other people's money. Vincent, are you ready to help me change the world?" Vincent thought about the monthly phone calls with Tommy that had gradually extended from 5 minutes to an hour, about his son's cautious but growing curiosity about his father's work with Sophia. He thought about the investors who'd trusted him once before, and the responsibility he now carried to honor their faith. Most of all, he thought about the brilliant young woman who'd seen past his failures to the person he could become, and who'd given him the chance to be a father again, different from before, but no less meaningful. "I've been ready for this my entire life," he said. "I just needed the right partner to show me how." That night, alone in his apartment that no longer felt too large, Vincent opened his laptop and began typing an email to his son, their weekly correspondence that had slowly evolved from stilted updates to genuine conversation. "Tommy," he wrote, "I want to tell you about my business partner. She's 22 years old, smarter than me, tougher than me, and she's taught me that our worst moments can become the foundation for our best work. She reminds me of you in so many ways: your curiosity, your refusal to accept easy answers, your ability to see possibilities where others see problems. I know I can't undo the years I lost with you, but if you're ever willing, I'd like to introduce you to her. I think you'd understand each other. You both believe in second chances, even when they're hard to give." For the first time in 6 years, Vincent signed the email simply "Love, Dad," instead of his formal signature. He hit send and walked to his window, looking out over the city lights toward the Blackstone estate, where it all began. Somewhere in that house, Sophia was probably still awake, working on plans that would help thousands of people build better lives. Theodore was likely reading financial reports, but now with the satisfaction of knowing his company was making a difference, not just a profit. The next morning brought something Vincent had stopped hoping for, a response from Tommy that arrived within hours instead of days. "Dad," the email began, not Vincent as it had been for years, "I've been following the news stories about your company. My economics professor showed our class the article in Forbes about impact investing. When I told him you were my father, he said you and Sophia were changing how people think about money and responsibility. I'd like to meet her, and I'd like to understand what happened to you. Not the court version, but your version, if you're willing to tell it." Vincent read the message 3 times before he trusted that it was real. Then he called Sophia. "She wants to meet Tommy?" Sophia's excitement carried through the phone. "Vincent, this is incredible. When?" "He's flying out next week for spring break. But Sophia, I need you to understand. He might not be ready to forgive everything. He's still processing a lot of anger." "That's okay," Sophia said with the wisdom that never ceased to amaze him. "Forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a direction. As long as you're both walking toward each other, that's what matters." The meeting took place at Vincent's apartment, which Sophia had insisted on helping him prepare. She'd brought flowers from the Blackstone garden, roses from the bush where they'd first spoken, and arranged them in a simple vase on his kitchen table. The gesture was so naturally thoughtful, so instinctively nurturing, that Vincent realized she'd inherited more than just Theodore's business acumen. When Tommy knocked, Vincent's hands shook as he opened the door. His son stood in the hallway, 17 years old now, taller than Vincent remembered, with Rachel's careful expression, but Vincent's stubborn chin. The boy who'd once built elaborate cities from building blocks now carried himself with the measured caution of someone who'd learned early that adults could disappoint you in spectacular ways. "Hi, Dad." The word came out stiff, experimental, as if Tommy was testing how it felt after years of disuse. "Hi, son." Vincent's voice broke on the second word. "Thank you for coming." Sophia wheeled herself forward, extending her hand with the easy confidence she'd developed over the years. "You must be Tommy. Your father talks about you constantly. I've been looking forward to meeting the person who taught him that precision matters more than speed." Tommy shook her hand, curiosity overriding his wariness. "He told you about that? About how you used to arrange your baseball cards by statistics? About how you'd count everything twice to make sure it was perfect? He said watching you taught him that being thorough wasn't the same as being slow. It was being careful with things that mattered." Vincent felt his chest tighten as he watched Tommy's expression soften. Sophia had an uncanny ability to see the best in people and reflect it back to them, a gift that had been invaluable in their business and was now working its quiet magic on his son. Over the next hour, as Sophia explained their investment philosophy and showed Tommy the impact their funds had generated, Vincent watched his son transform. The defensive teenager gave way to the curious boy Vincent remembered, asking sharp questions about risk assessment and social return on investment. "So you're basically trying to make money while fixing problems?" Tommy asked. "Exactly," Sophia replied. "Your father taught me that the most dangerous thing about financial power is using it without considering the consequences. We're trying to prove that you can be profitable and ethical at the same time." Tommy looked at Vincent with something approaching respect. "Is that why you went to prison? Because you forgot about consequences?" Vincent felt the familiar weight of that question, but this time it didn't crush him. "I went to prison because I convinced myself that rules didn't apply to me, that I was too smart to get caught, and that protecting my reputation was more important than protecting my client's trust." He met his son's eyes. "I was wrong about all of those things, and people got hurt because of my arrogance. But you're trying to do better now, every day. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't, but I never stop trying." Tommy nodded slowly, processing this admission. "Sophia, do you trust him, after knowing what he did?" Sophia's answer came without hesitation. "I trust him because of what he did, not despite it. He understands the real cost of dishonesty in a way that most people never will. That makes him the most careful, most ethical person I know." Later, after Tommy had returned to his hotel and promised to have dinner with them the next evening, Sophia and Vincent sat in his kitchen, sharing Chinese takeout, and reflecting on the day. "He's going to forgive you," Sophia said matter-of-factly, twirling lo mein around her fork. "It might take time, but he's already started. I could see it in how he looked at you when you talked about consequences. How can you be so sure? Because he came. Because he called you Dad. Because he's here trying to understand instead of just staying angry." She paused, considering her words. "And because he's your son. He has your curiosity and your capacity for growth. Those things don't just disappear because someone makes mistakes." Vincent felt tears threatening again, a frequent occurrence since Sophia had re-entered his life and taught him that vulnerability could be a strength rather than a weakness. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said. I spent so many years thinking I'd failed as a father because I couldn't be perfect for Tommy. But working with you taught me that maybe the most important thing a parent can do is show their children how to learn from failure, how to take responsibility, how to keep trying even when you've messed up badly. Maybe that's why we found each other, Sophia said thoughtfully. You needed to learn how to be proud of growth instead of perfection, and I needed to learn that taking risks was worth it, even if you might fail. 3 months later, Vincent stood in the back of a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, watching Sophia deliver the commencement address for the executive education program. In the third row, Tommy sat next to Theodore, both of them beaming with the kind of pride that comes from watching someone you love exceed every expectation. The greatest investment we can make, Sophia was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, is in second chances, for companies that want to do better, for people who've learned from their mistakes, and for ourselves when we're brave enough to try again. After the ceremony, the 4 of them gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Charles River. Tommy had been accepted to MIT's graduate program in sustainable engineering. Theodore was preparing to step back from day-to-day operations at Meridian to focus on philanthropic work, and Sophia was finalizing plans for the national expansion of their impact investing model. I have something to say, Tommy announced as they waited for dessert. He looked directly at Vincent, his expression serious but no longer guarded. I spent a lot of years being angry at you, and maybe I needed that anger to protect myself while I figured out who I was apart from being your son. Vincent nodded, understanding the necessity of that distance, even though it had nearly killed him. But I've been watching what you've built with Sophia, and I've been reading about the work you're doing, and I realized something. Tommy's voice steadied. You're not the same person who made those mistakes. You've become someone who uses his failures to help other people succeed. That's not the father I lost. That's the father I always wished I had. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Theodore reached across the table to squeeze Sophia's hand. Sophia wiped away tears she hadn't tried to hide. And Vincent felt something he'd thought was permanently broken finally begin to heal. I don't expect you to forget what happened, Vincent said carefully. I just hope you can forgive who I used to be, enough to know who I'm trying to become. I already have, Tommy said simply. And I'd like to be part of it, if you'll have me. Sophia mentioned you're looking at sustainable technology investments, and I have some ideas about companies that are developing carbon capture solutions. Vincent looked around the table at the 3 people who'd given him back his life. Theodore, who'd risked his reputation to offer redemption. Sophia, who'd taught him that wisdom could grow from wreckage. And Tommy, who'd found the courage to love an imperfect father. We'd be honored to have you, Vincent said, his voice thick with gratitude. As they walked along the river after dinner, Vincent found himself beside Sophia while Theodore and Tommy discussed MIT's engineering program a few steps ahead. Thank you, Vincent said quietly. For what? For seeing something in me worth saving. For teaching me that being a father doesn't end just because you've failed at it. For showing me that second chances aren't just about forgiving the past. They're about building a better future. Sophia smiled, the same radiant expression that had first caught his attention through a study window years ago. You know what you taught me? Vincent shook his head. That broken things can be beautiful. That failure can be the beginning of wisdom. And that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose to build from love instead of obligation. They walked in comfortable silence, watching Theodore and Tommy's animated conversation about sustainable technology and social responsibility. 2 generations connected by their shared belief in the possibility of redemption, in the power of second chances, in the radical idea that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of growth. Vincent Hayes, former criminal, devoted mentor, and twice blessed father, finally understood that his greatest success wouldn't be measured in dollars or accolades, but in the lives he'd helped nurture and the love he'd learned to give without reservation. Behind them, the city lights reflected off the dark water like stars, each one a reminder that even in the darkness, there was always light enough to find your way home.